Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Hello there, it's 6 o'clock. I'm Michelle Dewberry. This is Dewbs & Co. Let's face it, tonight there is only one story in town, the witch hunt. Well, it worked. What am I talking about? You know what I'm talking about. Boris Johnson has resigned. Well, of course, he has not gone anywhere yet, much to the kind of frustration, shall we say, of many. What a joke it was. Did you see all of those resignations? One after the other, after the other, after the other, after the other. Even after Boris Johnson had said, OK, I'm going to make an announcement, my resignation is coming. The reservations, probably still, yeah, very accurate. The resignations carried on coming. Why? You know, what do you think to this? Severance pay. If you resign as a minister, you get paid for it, for the privilege of resigning. If you resign for whatever reason, quite frankly, the bill of those payments currently stand to cost us, should I say, over £400,000. When you think about that, it kind of makes sense, doesn't it, why people would be quite so quick to hand their resignations in. But I want to know, what do you think about all of the goings-on? Was Boris Johnson right to resign? And who do you want next? And, crucially, what do the Tories need to do to either get your vote next time or keep it if they had it? Those are my three questions to you, and that is what we're going to get into tonight with my panel. So get your thinking caps on, get yourself emailing me or tweeting me, and we'll speak to you in a second. But first, let's get tonight's latest news headlines.
Thanks, Michelle. I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. Boris Johnson has resigned as leader of the Conservative Party. Addressing the country outside Number 10, he said he was deeply saddened, but it was clearly the will of his party. He also explained that he fought to remain because he felt it was his duty. The decision to step down follows 3 days of government revolt that's seen almost 60 MPs, including 5 cabinet ministers, quit. Boris Johnson says he will continue to serve as Prime Minister until the party chooses his successor, which is expected to happen by October.
It is clearly now the will of the Parliamentary Conservative Party that there should be a new leader of that party and therefore a new Prime Minister. I know that there will be many people who are relieved and perhaps quite a few who will also be disappointed. And I want you to know how sad I am to be giving up the best job in the world. But them's the breaks.
Well, following that resignation speech, Boris Johnson tweeted his thanks to the British public, saying it was an immense privilege to serve as their Prime Minister. He also pledged to continue serving in their best interests until his successor is in place. Former Health Secretary Matt Hancock says the next Tory leader needs to attract broad support.
Next election is likely about 2 years from now. We need to deliver in that time. But then we've got to also be able to get the support that we need to form the administration after that, because the risk is that you have not only Starmer, because he can't win on his own, and Labour have admitted that, but Starmer plus Sturgeon, maybe even plus Ed Davey, referendum on Scottish independence, probably another referendum on the voting system. This is a very, very serious threat to the future of our country.
Well, Boris Johnson's leadership had come under increased scrutiny in recent months following a number of scandals. He tried to protect former MP Owen Paterson, who repeatedly broke lobbying rules, by attempting to overhaul the MP's standards system. He also faced cross-party criticism for attending gatherings in Whitehall during lockdown, for which he was fined in April. And, of course, most recently, he was found to have promoted MP Chris Pincher to the Tory Whip's office, despite being aware of previous allegations of sexual misconduct. A cabinet reshuffle has been underway to replace those who've either resigned or been sacked. Kit Malthouse has been appointed Chancellor for the Duchy of Lancaster, the most senior position after PM. James Cleverly is the new Education Secretary. Robert Buckland, the new Welsh Secretary. Shailesh Vara is the new Northern Ireland Secretary. And Greg Clark has replaced Michael Gove as Levelling Up Secretary, saying he'll do his best to provide stability in government Meanwhile, former Technologies Minister Chris Philp has said he'll return to government if required now that Boris Johnson has gone. Well, during his resignation speech, Boris Johnson referred to the UK's support for Ukraine as one of the key achievements of his premiership and vowed to support their fight for freedom for as long as it takes. In a phone call to Ukraine's president this afternoon, he said the UK would continue to supply vital defensive aid for as long as needed. He ended the call by praising President Zelensky, saying, "You're a hero. Everyone loves you." That as G20 foreign ministers meet in Bali, Indonesia, this week for a meeting that will focus on the war in Ukraine. It'll be the first time foreign ministers meet Russia's Sergei Lavrov since the start of the invasion in February. Defence Secretary Ben Wallace says UK support for Ukraine will continue despite Boris Johnson's resignation.
You know, the assistance to Ukraine we give is not just one person, you know, not me, not the Prime Minister, it's the whole effort. Actions matter in all of this. And, you know, while the Prime Minister will be incredibly sad to leave this post, he has led from the front on Ukraine, as he had on COVID and obviously Brexit. And I think that isn't lost on many people. But the whole of the political system is supportive of what we're doing in Ukraine. I don't expect that to finish at all.
This is GB News. We're on TV, online and on DAB+ radio. Now let's get back to Dewbs & Co.
Thanks for that, Ray. Well, I mean, as I mentioned at the start of the programme, we can only really focus on one thing tonight, can't we? That is, of course, Boris Johnson. Resignation is in. He, however, of course, is still there, much to the frustration, shall I say, of many. So this tonight is the focus of this whole show, a Boris Johnson special, if you will. And who better to be on my panel tonight, other than people that know him, have worked directly with him, have even advised him? Well, all of the people on this panel were, let's just call them right-hand men to former Conservative Prime Ministers in their time. We've got Alex Dean, the Conservative commentator and former advisor to David Cameron. Cameron? What? Who's that? I mean, do we even remember David Cameron anymore? It feels like such a long time ago, all of these people, doesn't it? Giles Kenningham, who's the former head of press in Number 10 to David Cameron, and special advisor to Boris Johnson, Daniel Moylan. Good evening to you, gents.
Hello,
nice to have you. Looking forward to getting into some of this tonight. And you know the drill at home, don't you? It's not just about us here and our thoughts. It's about you at home as well. What's on your mind? What do you make to all of this? I've told you, haven't I, what I want to get into tonight. Do you think he was right to resign? Let's face it, he didn't have much choice, did he? But do you support that decision or not? Are you pleased today, or are you upset, frustrated, whatever today? I also want to know who do you want to replace Boris Johnson, and also how are the Tories going to keep your vote, or even gain your vote, by the way, at the next election? And also, are you even going to bother voting? I know lots of you were galvanised at the last election, whether it was by Boris or Brexit. How are you feeling now if you're one of those people? Would you even bother to vote if there was a general election? I don't know, let's say next week. Why not? It sounds ludicrous, but anything can happen. You tell me. Get in touch. gbviews@gbnews.uk is the email address. You can tweet me at gbnews or at Michelle Dewbs. You can also subscribe, of course, to YouTube, get our app, listen to us on the radio if you're heading out. So wherever you are, of course, you are very, very welcome tonight. Right, let's try and recap, shall we, all of the goings-on today. Our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, is live from Downing Street. Darren, hello. Good evening.
Very good evening, Michelle.
Talk us through it.
What an extraordinary day. Yeah, so quite, in some ways, it was almost surreal, I have to say. I was here in this very spot as Boris Johnson stood there and made his resignation speech a little earlier. And I say surreal because in many ways, it actually in the end came quite quickly. There was much talk about it happening yesterday. There was a very free-will atmosphere at Westminster. But this morning, it clearly became very clear to the Prime Minister that he would struggle to fill ministerial posts, the government would struggle to function, and that the vast majority of the party were not in his favour. And the House of Cards, in the end, fell quite quickly. And where we're at now is we've got a new cabinet in place, lots of new ministers. Greg Clark is at Levelling Up. We've got James Cleverly at Education. Incredible to think that this morning, when Michelle Dolan, the very recently appointed Education Secretary, resigned, there were no ministers in the Education Department. Well, James Cleverly is there as the Secretary of State, Robert Buckland in the Welsh office. But again, it all seems a little surreal given the fact that Robert Buckland yesterday was calling for the Prime Minister to resign. Now he's in the cabinet. It's very clear that these men and women who've taken those positions see it as an interim post. They do not expect to be there for a long period of time, and frankly they've taken those jobs to try and find and provide some stability in the government. But in many ways, Michelle, as is always with these things, the United States, they call them lame duck presidents. We've now effectively got a caretaker Prime Minister. The power almost drains from here, and the focus too, and it's going to shift to kind of across the road to the Houses of Parliament, where the race to see who will replace Boris Johnson in many ways is well and truly underway. There will be lots of runners and riders, it seems. Not that many have declared thus far, but I suspect by the start of next week we will see quite a cross-section of the party standing. Will it be Rishi Sunak, Sajid Javid, Nadhim Zahawi, the current Chancellor, Tom Tugendhat, Steve Barclay, I've forgotten his name, Steve Baker, there we go. We know that Suella Braverman is definitely going to run, Jeremy Hunt, Liz Truss, Ben Wallace, it goes on and on and on. And that's going to be fascinating. The big question, I suppose, in the end is not how this plays out in many regards, but when it does, if you look at the timetable, because many people within the Conservative Party, many people within CCHQ, essentially the governing body of the Conservatives, want to see this election wrapped up pretty quickly, Michelle. They want to see these kind of the number of candidates whittled down to 2 by the parliamentary recess, and that is in just a matter of a week's time, and then the membership get to decide during the summer break. And that frankly means, if that happens, and it's pretty likely, I would suggest, that we could have a new Prime Minister, a new incumbent inside number 10, certainly by the end of the summer.
Fascinating stuff, Darren. Thank you very much. OK, I was asking you guys at home some questions at the start of the show. Just to recap, in case you've got a very short memory indeed, because it was only 12 minutes ago. I'm asking you, do you think Boris Johnson was right to resign? What do you feel? Are you happy today? Was it the right decision? Are you angry, frustrated? What? I also, a bit later on in the programme, will be asking who do you think should be our next Prime Minister? And also, how do the Tories keep hold of you? How do they, are you going to even turn out at the next election? That's what I want you to tell me tonight. And I can tell you lots of you have already been getting in contact. Alan, though, says, Michelle, please can you explain what you're talking about at the start of the programme when you say about resignation and money? If what you've said is true, then many people will be astounded. Yeah, Alan, what I'm referring to there is what you call severance pay. So in any other normal walk of life, if you decide to resign, your role, let's just say I decided to resign here for whatever reason, that'd be goodbye, Michelle, thanks, see you later. But not, it would appear, if you're a minister. So just to give you some context to this, if you voluntarily resign from the government as a role of the minister, as I'm explaining, you get 25% of your annual salary, so 3 months' pay, basically. And it's irrespective of why you resign, whether it's for political reasons or even, get this, if you resign in disgrace. So Pincher Boy, we've been speaking a lot about him. He stands to get about 7 or 8 grand from that. The Education Secretary, who took the position and then resigned a mere 36 hours later, yes, you did hear me right there, 36 hours later, stands in line to get over £16,000. Now, I've got to say, when you see all of these resignations flying in, and I was very confused today as to why they were continuing to come in, even after Boris Johnson has said, you know what, I'm doing this announcement, this is coming. The resignations carried on coming. Well, I personally look at that, and it's quite an incentive. It would be an incentive for anyone, I think. I personally think that's very wrong. I do have to make clear this isn't a Tory thing. I don't want people to be saying, oh, this is the Tories getting on the gravy train. This is the rules. Them are the rules, whether you like that or not. I just think it's a little bit of a joke. Lots of you, though, have been getting in touch. Who's this? Link says, I am finished with the Conservatives. Whether or not Boris has done right or wrong, the treacherous way the Cabinet and other MPs have behaved is a disgrace. They are self-serving snakes and totally without honour. Peter says, the mainstream media got the Brexiteers sacked in the end, and I will never forgive any of them. I've got to say, Peter, life was made very difficult for Boris Johnson, wasn't it, for a very long time? You know, he couldn't do a press conference about anything. He was doing international press conferences on stages with, I think it was NATO, and people couldn't help ask him about Partygate. It was embarrassing, if you ask me. Phil says, brilliant resignation speech from Boris, dignified, humble and classy. They surely will miss this leader in days to come. You don't miss the well till it's dry. Rack says, I wish Boris hadn't resigned. This is all about Brexit, and I loathe all the Tories that have stabbed him in the back and ignored the democratic vote. She says that she feels like the electorate do not count anymore. Jack says, my thoughts are with Boris. He had no other choice but to resign. He's been hounded since he got into power. John says, Boris is a disgrace and he should leave immediately and go to Ukraine, as it seems to interest him far more there than it does here in the UK. That's some of your thoughts. I can tell you my inbox is on fire. You've got lots of views. But first, let me open it up to my panel. Daniel, you're a former advisor to Boris Johnson. What do you make of today's going on?
Well, first of all, I don't think he should have resigned on the one hand, and on the other hand, he had no choice but to resign. So if a big rock is coming your way, you dodge out of its way, and that's, you know, he wanted to stay on, but he was forced to go. And I think it's a great pity. I think he was a great Prime Minister, is a great Prime Minister. He's transformed this country more than any Prime Minister since Mrs. Thatcher. Set completely on a new course. And he's been knocked out. I mean, you know, you might ask the question, is it a coup? And I mean, a coup implies some sense of organisation. I don't see it. I mean, Boris was right when he said it's herd instinct. It's really a bunch of sort of maddened sheep running towards a cliff with, you know, one hand over their eyes and, according to you, the other hand in on their wallet. It's not a very attractive sight, the whole thing, I'm afraid. And the fact that they carried on jumping off the cliff even after he said he was going is just sort of hilarious.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's all very peculiar, isn't it? Giles, a new face. Welcome to you. What do you make of all of this today?
I mean, look, I think his position was totally unsustainable. I think he should have gone earlier. It's good that he's gone now. I think the position is totally recoverable for the Tory party. I think a new leader can win. And what you've seen in the polls is more of a Tory collapse rather than a Labour revival. But his position was totally unsustainable. You know, you had loads of ministers walking out. You had the cabinet ministers going. And really, I have to say, yes, you know, Boris did deliver, his great election results in 2019, but he was the author of his own downfall. And, you know, had he been straight with the public over Partygate, had he fessed up at the start, had they been more transparent about Chris Pincher, then maybe he wouldn't have found himself in this position.
Rubbish.
Daniel says rubbish, but Daniel, before you tell me why you think it's rubbish, let me ask Alex. Your
Well,
thoughts?
I agree with a bit of what Giles said. I agree that the handling of the crises was bad, especially the Pincher episode. I think that the government blundered the explanations of what had gone on there and the apologies, which are well overdue, very badly. And that's before we even discuss the substance of managing someone who palpably was a troubled soul. I'm just saying they managed the situation very badly. So I concede that part, what Giles says, absolutely. I also concede that by the time he resigned, Boris did have to go, and that's where we part ways, because I think Boris had to go because people had resigned in such large numbers that it was just impossible to remain in post anymore, and I think they were wrong to do so. I think that Boris Johnson was a perfectly plausible Prime Minister. I thought he was doing a good job, and indeed I was doing the media round up until this morning. I was like the last Japanese soldier on my island, carrying on the good fight, urging the Prime Minister to carry on. Now, in hindsight, I think it was inevitable by the time the pressure had built up to the extent it did that he resigned this morning, but I still regret it. I think that he's been done in the end by people who never gave him a chance, and some of whom never forgiven him for Brexit, some of whom were in the media, some of whom were in the Tory party. My point is none of them had the spark to produce the kind of electoral success that Boris Johnson did. And I'm going on a bit, so just one more point. Just before we came on air, Colin Brazier was interviewing a guy from the Northern Echo who asked the question, what will the ramifications for your patch be responded, quite frankly, well, first of all, great legacy for Boris Johnson in the north, and in levelling up really meant something with moving civil servants and moving jobs, much more than any Prime Minister had done. And secondly, by the way, they'll lose all those seats back. All those red wall seats that Boris Johnson won for the Conservative Party, they'll go back. All the things we've heard about individual mandates and people winning seats on their own, and we don't have a presidential system, the frank view from the Northern Echo was we had those seats for as long as Boris Johnson was there, and they'll now all go back again. Probably true.
Go back Labour, you mean? See, I've got to say, I've been a Northerner, I'm not so sure. When the Labour Party is wandering around with a leader who isn't even comfortable enough to say a woman doesn't have a penis, I think that the culture wars, all that kind of stuff, will play on people's minds.
No, what I mean, you don't have to convince me that Keir Starmer's a poor politician or a poor leader. I agree with that. What I mean is that there are members of Parliament who owe their position, their seat, not to their fantastic dynamic personalities and campaigning, but to the blue rosette on and the fact that Boris Johnson campaigned and got them elected, and they stuck it to him. And that was the point I was seeking to make.
Yeah, sorry, I misunderstood you. You're absolutely right. And Kevin, one of the viewers, has written in. And Kevin, you've put it in capital letters. What do I always say? I say, you mean business when you put it in capitals. You say, dear Michelle, I voted for Boris, not my local MP. I will never vote Conservative again. Now, I've got to say, this is a sentiment that I was sharing on my Twitter account, I think it was last night or whatever, when I was saying that there are so many people who voted for Boris. The pushback I always get is people are messaging me saying, oh, Michelle, you don't understand the system in this country. We don't have a presidential system. We vote for our local MPs. And what I would say in response to that, and I'll repeat myself, I think I even said it on the show last night, I completely understand the system that we've got. I understand the technicalities of it. I understand how it works. But I also understand, because you guys get in contact with me, you talk to me every day, I understand the sentiment of people.
Exactly.
And the sentiment was different to the technicalities of the voting system. And I think that's the point that you're making.
Right.
And so many people deny and undermine that. Daniel, when Giles was talking, you were saying rubbish. What's rubbish?
Well, Boris made mistakes, but that isn't the reason Boris was out of office. The reason Boris was out of office is that there was a bunch of people who have never forgiven him for winning Brexit and were determined to find a way of punishing him, partly out of loathing and partly as a step towards getting us back into closer alignment with the European Union with prospects in the future. But it's not just that. There are other issues, but that was the core and the driver of it. And they would have found issues to pile on about if they hadn't found Partygate, if they hadn't found this. They'd have found other issues. It might have been more policy issues. I think Boris did make mistakes. First mistake he made was he didn't realise, because actually he's a terribly nice guy and he wants to be friends with people. He didn't realise that they were going to come for him with this viciousness. I sort of thought they would, but he didn't really believe they would. And he tried to get the whole of the Conservative Party together represented in his candidate. He didn't appoint a divisive cabinet. He tried to get the different wings of the party together, and he spent too much of his time falling around trying to please people who are never going to be pleased with him. And then when the crunch time came, he wasn't ready for it. He wasn't ready for the attacks that they launched on him. And as a result of that, he was a bit, Partygate badly handled, so on. Couldn't agree more about that. But he didn't realise that those hooks were going to be exploited in the way that they were. And those are, I think, the flaws that he came at it with.
But you say, oh, he's a nice guy and all the rest of it, just wants to be mates with everybody. Alan, one of my viewers, has emailed in and said, this is all Dominic Cummings doing. Well,
yeah, that was the most disastrous political appointment since Rasputin.
But the reason I bring that up is because Dominic Cummings is obviously having an absolute field day. He's spent a lot of his day-to-day tweeting thoughts and feelings. He says, I mean, you're saying, oh, he's a nice guy. Boris, I'm talking about, not Dominic. He's a nice guy. He just wants to be friends with everyone. Dominic Cummings is tweeting in character. Boris blames everyone else, thinks he's the real victim, sets up betrayal stories for future Tory conferences and Telegraph columns. We're all in for a nightmare if he's allowed to squat. That's what Dominic...
Yeah, well, Dominic Cummings is a guy who came in not knowing Boris, thought he was the man, he was there to run the country, thought Boris was in his way, that he was the Prime Minister and Boris was in his way. I mean, he was crazed. I spent 8 years working for Boris and we worked together quite well. And he is a nice guy. And Dominic Cummings has sustained this campaign in a sort of crazed, obsessional way since he left Downing Street. And just, who are you likely to believe? You know, who would you believe? Believe Dominic Cummings, if you like.
What do you think, Giles, to some of what you just heard, for example, from, whoever?
I think, with all due respect, Daniel, I don't think this was about Brexit. Because a lot of those MPs who were anti-Brexit left Parliament in 2019. A lot of those MPs who backed Boris, like Steve Baker, Andrew Bridgen, Deanna Davidson, who are pro-Brexit, were the ones calling for him to leave. In the end, it was about his behaviour. I agree with you partly on Dominic Cummings, but ultimately Boris did appoint Dominic Cummings.
No,
it's disastrous.
No, absolutely.
He appointed him.
I said
so he can take the consequences
appointment
for that. I thought his resignation speech, on one level it struck not a bad tone. I'd like to see more humility with it. He was still calling it an eccentric decision to get rid of him. And really, I think those are the points where you can really define your legacy and how history judges you. I think there could have been a bit more of a humble tone. I just do not think he can stay for much longer. They should have Dominic Raab in there because you need someone in there.
Give up. This is this constant war.
Let me just finish.
You can't even stop the war on Boris now that he's said he's going to resign.
Let me just finish my point and you can come back on it. The reason why I think you should have Dominic Raab in there is you need someone who's got some power. Now, Raab may stay in the cabinet. Everyone knows Boris is gone. His authority has been fatally undermined.
I'm going to ask you to hold that thought, only because I'm going to take a quick break in a second. And when I come back, I want to look a bit more specifically into who should replace him. So we talk about Raab and many other people. In just a second, Derek, my viewer, says, Boris has lost his bottle. He locked us down, destroyed our country, destroyed me, and I despise him. His political assassination was inevitable, and I'm a party member. That's what Derek says there. Ian says Boris's demise is his own creation, as he does not know how to tell the truth and be honest, locking the country down for 2 years, destroying the economy, and now ending up with inflation. This is all worse than the 70s, and it's all down to the clown that is Boris Johnson. Ooh, harsh, Ian. Right, going to take a quick break. When I come back, you know what I'm talking about. Who should replace Boris Johnson, and who is going to, or should I say, how are the Tories going to get or keep your vote at the next election?
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Hello there, welcome back to Dewbs & Co. with me, Michelle Dewberry. I can tell you now, lots of you are getting in contact, and there is a bit of a mixed sentiment. There is real fury on the one hand that this has been done to Boris. There's a real sentiment out there that this has been done to him, not that he's done this himself, it's been done to him. The other side of the fence is basically this is all Boris's fault, that he's brought it to himself. I'm asking you, where do you stand on all of this? gbviews@gbnews.uk is the email address. Also, keeping me company on my panel tonight, we've got an advisor special. Alex Dean, Conservative commentator and former advisor to David Cameron. Charles Kenningham, who's the former head of press in Number 10, also to David Cameron, and special advisor to Boris Johnson, Daniel Moylan. Bob says, Boris did not have a choice when it comes to resigning. The backstabbers would have kept on going until it destroyed the party. Darryl says, how can they all just quit and leave us in the same position in terms of things like the cost of living? Alan says, I personally would not vote for a right-wing Tory party, but I would vote for a right-of-centre Tory party. Terry says, I'm so disappointed. Boris should not have been forced to go by self-serving cabinet ministers. Ben Wallace, she says, is the only voice that's real and trustworthy and would get my vote. We'll be looking in just a second as to who would get your vote. But there's a couple of sentiments that are coming through thick and fast in terms of the actual process, which is really, I mean, what you're all kind of saying is Nigel is saying we should have a general election. The Conservatives are over. Maureen says, I'm gutted of Boris going. I pray the next leader is a Brexit MP and they need to make big strides to get our country back to feeling and being great again. Well, there you go. Let me know all of your thoughts on that. Stuart says, Boris has brought this on himself. He appointed Gove, the same person who stabbed him in the back. He wasn't a good leader. He was an appeaser. Good leaders surround themselves with loyal, trusted people and move forward together. Boris surrounded himself with enemies and paid the price. Philip says, Michelle, we, the electorate, put Boris into power and it should have been us that voted him out if we wish so. Well, Philip, that leads me nicely to my next thing that I want to discuss with you. The last 3 Prime Ministers have all resigned while in office. David Cameron left after the Brexit vote in 2016. Theresa May resigned after losing multiple votes, of course, on the Brexit policy. And we all know what's happened today, don't we? Boris Johnson has given his resignation because of everything that we've just been discussing. Which leads me, Alex, to Phil's question, actually. Should we be able to change leader mid-term without it going back to the electorate?
My answer is yes, and I explain it thus. I sort of don't want to appear under false pretences. Both these gentlemen worked with their prime ministers whilst they were prime ministers. I was a far more junior person working with David Cameron in the shadow cabinet when he was there. But to extend your question, I saw 2 opposition leaders go mid-term. And by extension, the logic might be that the opposition changing leaders should mean some kind of democratic event because you face a profoundly different kind of opposition. Ian Duncan Smith was an exhausted volcano and was thrown out mid-term by his party. And Michael Howard lost an election, took a little bit of time, and then had a leadership election which produced the David Cameron era. I thought they were both right to go. And in just the same vein, I thought that David Cameron and Theresa May were right to go. So the Tory party hasn't just had prime ministers resigning in mid-term. It's been quite a long-term feature of my life in politics. So, and of course, Margaret Thatcher before that. So all in all...
Showing your age, Alex.
Well, thank you, yes. But all in all, it's a long time coming, this idea that people can go mid-parliament. If you can't change circumstances when a leader has effectively run out of road and have to go back to the electorate, it either produces a fundamentally different constitutional settlement in which a 5-year parliament is frankly too long, and we'll start winding up with an Australian-style system where they have 3-year elections, or even shorter if that's what you're aiming at. Or you have to accept that a political party that's won a majority got elected because of its broad mandate, its position, and is able to replace leaders, whether that leader be ill, be tired and have no more policies, have lost the trust of their colleagues or whatever. You should be able to change leaders. And that's notwithstanding the fact I don't think Boris should have gone. On principle, you should still be able to change your leader mid-term.
See, there you go, Philip. So you're saying that you voted him in, so you guys should have a say in whether or not he's out and who should take his place. Alex said, no, you shouldn't. Charles, where do you sit?
Look, it's a less than perfect system, but I have to say I do agree with Alex. We haven't got a presidential system in this country. We've got a first-past-the-post system. We need some form of stability in this country. I really think the last thing we need after the past 6 years is another election. The Tories were elected on a broad mandate, as Alex said, for the next 5 years, and they should have the ability to change midway through, as did Labour when Gordon Brown came in after Tony Blair chose to depart. So No, I think it's well within their rights. And yeah, I think the key question now as a Tory is just not to have a long election, long enough so people are held to account. We can see whether they're match fit, but then get back on with the job in hand.
Daniel, where do you stand on this whole kind of should you be able to change a leader for whatever reason, quite frankly, mid-term without going back to the electorate?
Well, I think there's a real issue here. Of course, constitutionally and legally, Alex and Giles correct. This is our system, and it's very difficult to see how you can keep that system and not have the power to change leaders. You'd have to have a very radical reform in order to make that an unnecessary feature. But changing leader through this sort of revolt, I mean, if you change a leader because they're sick or something, it's another matter, but changing a leader through this sort of revolt should be a really rare and momentous thing. And in the Conservative Party now, it's become an addiction. And if it's going to keep happening the whole time, we really need to think about whether there should be a stronger convention that if you change the leader, you should be looking to a general election within a certain period. And it is different, and it is different. I'm allowed to have original thoughts, Alex. And I really think this is probably good for a party, because what we know is that when you change leader, Gordon Brown's an example. Gordon Brown should have had an election within a few months, and everyone expected him to have an election within a few months, and he bottled it. He would have won that election probably. He bottled it. He carried on. He lost. And you see other things. John Major just scraped home, having hung on to the last minute. But he did scrape home, to be fair. But nobody expected him to at that point, and so on. So I think we should really have this idea, an expectation that if you're going to make it a habit, that within a year or so you should have a general election. You've got time to get your government together, to show you can put the stuff together, you can have but then you would go to the electorate. I think it's a bit of an abuse if you did this a year into a parliament. I mean, we're more than a year into this one, I know. But if you did this a year into a parliament, it's a bit like James Callaghan. Nobody remembers James Callaghan, of course. I remember James Callaghan. But he became Prime Minister a year and a bit into a parliament, ran it to the very last day.
Had a whole parliament, yeah.
Sorry?
And had a whole parliament.
And ran it to the very last day and was duly crushed by Mrs Thatcher.
Theresa May had 4 years of a Cameron election result that she didn't use after she went. But the flip side of that is interesting from the party political perspective, and I know it's a different test, but one positive thing to come out of this for the Conservative Party, to which we all belong, your guests at least, Michelle, on this panel, is the timing. The opportunity that the Tory party now has is to rebuild and seek to have a new offer to give to the electorate before it goes to the polls. So it's the reverse point about should you have an election. From a party political position, the answer is God no. The answer is you've got to get yourself together, figure out what your answer is to that significant proportion of the electorate who say, I'm not going to vote for you again, I voted for Boris, I don't want to vote for you. You've got to figure out what you're going to say to them, what you can offer that's really conservative, what you're going to do that's going to bring them back into the fold, and how you can present yourself as having new ideas and real energy to the electorate.
To Alex's point, this is why, whilst people may say it was brutal, the timing was right to do this, because if they left it much longer, you wouldn't have given someone enough time to bed in and have an offer to the electorate. Because I know some cabinet ministers were looking at this going, we could end up in a Gordon Brown situation where it gets too late and Boris Johnson just remains there. So actually, painful to go through now, but I do think they can recover.
So, Daniel, you mentioned John Major. So one of the interventions that we've seen today is he was basically saying Boris should be gone pretty much now, not waiting to see it out. Where do we all stand on that?
Well, he's become a rather sad obsessive.
Yeah, but but his point, though, so do you think that Boris essentially should be gone now, or do you think that he should be kind of waiting it out?
But what is the reason for denying Boris the courtesy that was given to Theresa May and David Cameron of staying in office until his successor is elected? That's the first question you have to ask. This is the established convention. So why are you going to depart from the convention? That's the first thing. Second thing is, why are we even talking about this? Because I can tell you one thing. If there are Conservatives who want to carry on the war against Boris even after he's resigned, they're not going to be welcome in the Conservative Party, because the party wants to move on. They want to look to the election. They want to look to the new leader. They want to stop arguing about Boris.
So I have a couple of... Let me try and actually answer your questions. On the first one, I think it's that a lot of people would refuse to serve as ministers in the government if they knew that Boris was going to be there for longer than a very short, longer period, days or weeks, certainly not months. And given that many of them had resigned on that basis, that's part of that's a reasonable.
That's just a bit ridiculous.
That's ridiculous. Yes.
Well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure it is.
They resigned
I don't
him
share
out.
their objections, right? I thought Boris Johnson should continue as Prime Minister. But if you think Boris Johnson is as bad as all that, then you can see the position which says I'm not going to be willing to serve. But the second thing that Daniel was asking about, which was why shouldn't it just, it's a courtesy basically, let it run for longer, is that we knew, to your point, that after we got a new leader, we were almost certainly going to have, and we thought it was very likely it was going to be Boris Johnson, we knew that we were going to have an election. And that election would take us through to a whole new parliament. That's not going to be the case here, is it?
Well, we didn't know that when David Cameron.
I think also, like, to be fair, I mean, David Cameron was gone within 2-3 weeks after.
That was partly because the election was rigged, and Andrea she was bullied quite deliberately out of continuing her campaign, and the members were robbed of their vote.
Well, it collapsed, and so Theresa May came through. But secondly, I think the reason why there should be someone else in there is there are key decisions which need to be made, and the person making those decisions needs to have some authority.
There's no authority
in a way,
whatsoever. No mandate, no elected
Dominic Raab
authority.
would have authority because he may be in the next cabinet. Everyone knows Boris is going. You need someone there who can actually bring Whitehall into line. And given the bloodiness and the way and what's happened, there have been so many people who've raised objections. I don't think it's sustainable for him to be in there long term. 2.5 months when key decisions have to be made. No. I mean, that's just, yeah.
You had no objection to David Cameron staying in for 2.5 months if
actually, we did.
If it had gone to the membership.
No, he could have stayed in. Even when Theresa, it transpired that she was going to be the Prime Minister, technically he could have stayed in. We had the conversation with him. We're like, if you stay there, you look like you're squatting. You know, you haven't got a power or authority now. You need to go. And he was gone within 2 days after that. He saw
after
that.
what?
On the Monday, when Andrea Leadsom dropped out leadership race, when it was clear, but he still, under the rules, could have stayed.
Oh, well, of course, once it's clear.
But he was like, and it was clear, it's like, you've got to go, don't squat.
Of course, that's
someone else should take
right.
up the mantle.
Nobody's suggesting that anyone should stay on after the party has decided who the successor is. And Theresa became the
think the problem here
Theresa became party leader because Andrea Leadsom stood down, rather than because
perhaps the compromise.
That's not her fault.
Perhaps the compromise position is that Boris Johnson should stay as long as we choose the next leader very quickly.
Yeah,
in which case that's fine.
Well, I think that is a compromise position. This comes to the point. There has to be an open race so you can actually test people, but they need to expedite it.
Do you agree
it
to go to the party members? That it's absolute imperative it should go to the party members?
Absolutely, completely. Yeah.
Right, well, I'm going to take a quick break in a second. When we come back, I'm asking who should then replace Boris Johnson? Who do you want your new Prime Minister to be? Ponder that. You've got a couple of minutes, and I'll see you then. The email address is gbviews@gbnews.uk. Tell me your thoughts, and I'll see you in a couple of minutes.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Hello there, welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Michelle Dewberry. Keeping me company tonight, Alex Dean, the Conservative commentator and former advisor to David Cameron, Giles Kenningham, former head of press in Number 10 to David Cameron, and former special advisor to Boris Johnson, Daniel Moylan. Nigel Farage will be joining us at 7 o'clock. Good evening, Nigel. What have you got?
Good evening. Well, it was inevitable. It was always going to happen. But the question I want to debate tonight is, should he be allowed to stay on as PM until the next leader gets selected? Now, that could be 5-10 weeks away. Voices out there, Dominic Cummings, John Major, even Lord Frost saying he should go immediately. I kind of take the view, don't kick a man when he's down, allow him to see out the last few weeks in office. But I think this question could lead to real friction in the Conservative Party next week.
Look forward to that. Don't forget, of course, you do owe me another drink, Nigel, from last night. You said 8 o'clock. It wasn't quite 8 o'clock. So the drinks are stacking up.
No.
Yes.
I tell you what, 6 months ago, I said he'd be gone by the 1st of July, and I was 6 days out. It wasn't a bad call.
Details, Nigel. I never forget a bet, I can tell you that. Right, I'll see you at 7 o'clock. OK, so back to the show. We all know, don't we, that Boris Johnson has resigned. So what does that mean? What is going to happen next when it comes to selecting a new leader? Well, let's have a look, shall we? Right, if you're watching any second now, there'll be something very fancy popping up on my screen, so I'm told. There you go. First, the candidates will be put themselves forward. Each candidate needs 8 MPs, basically to back them. The MPs will then vote, with candidates receiving fewer than 18 votes eliminated. It's like the X Factor, isn't it? Get out, you're out. In the second round of votes, candidates with less than 36 votes are out. The process will then continue until only 2 remain. The final stage is a postal vote of wider Conservative Party members, and when the winner becomes basically the leader of the party and the Prime Minister. Got to be honest, who would want that job? Quite frankly, I wouldn't. Would you? Giles, I think I know who you're going to tell me you want the leader to be, but nonetheless, tell me.
Who do you think I want?
Dominic Raab.
No, I don't at all. I was saying he would be a good caretaker Prime Minister. I actually think it's an open field. It's anyone's to get. And I think actually we need to have that leadership race to sort of see who the right person is, who can cope under pressure. I think there's plenty of talent knocking around, everyone from Nadeem Zahawi, you've got Sunak, I think Grant Shapps will probably throw his hat in the ring, Liz Truss. I think they need to be stress tested. The challenge for the Tory party is it doesn't break out into civil war and it exposes more splits and divisions. So how this leadership campaign is conducted is really important. And as both me and Alex were discussing before the break, is it needs to be done quickly. Not too quickly, but quickly. We can't be having leadership race or battle which goes on for 2.5 months. I would like to think that this could all be sewn up within the next 4 or 5 weeks.
Daniel, who do you think should be our next Prime Minister?
I haven't got a clue. You need somebody who will do the following things. First of all, we have to re-establish the Union. We have to sort out the Northern Ireland Protocol because that's a permanent harm to the constitution of the country. Second thing is we need to get the economic fundamentals right. We haven't done that. We had a Chancellor who was insisting on high taxes for no justifiable reason while leaving monetary policy too loose at a time of high inflation. We need that sorted out. And we need someone who understands that and gets a grip on the Treasury, a leader who gets a grip on the Prime Minister who gets a grip on the Treasury. The next thing is the whole net zero thing. We need to, at the very least, examine how the costs of net zero and achieving it by a certain arbitrary target are falling on people in the economy and what effect that's having on the cost of living. And finally, we need regulatory reform to reignite a spirit of entrepreneurship in our business sector rather than constantly feeding them on government contracts and government work. So we have some competition back and we start to improve our productivity. A candidate who recognises all of those things might well get my vote. So far, I haven't seen such a candidate, but I would like to do so.
Alex, who's for you?
My support seems to be the kiss of death, and that's why I'm going to dodge the question, not because I don't have preferences, but because I didn't want the Prime Minister to go, so he went. And then my first preference would be Dominic Raab becoming our Prime Minister, and he's ruled himself out. So it seems foolish of me to offer my support and kill off someone else's candidacy. But I will say that, unlucky for some, I make currently 13 candidates who are looking to run, some of whom may be more plausible than others. In my 13, by the way, I am including Michael Gove, who has ostensibly ruled himself out, but it's a different kind of ruling himself out to Dominic Raab's kind of ruling himself out. I'm also including the declared candidates so far, Steve Baker and Suella Braverman, and the sort of declared candidate, Jake Berry. And then you have basically half the cabinet, well, most of the cabinet, who are currently potential contenders. That first round is going to be a hell of a thing, and I think a lot of people are going to get at least eight votes to take them into that first round. And then you have a big old cull when quite a few people won't get to 18.
Just a quick reminder, if you're interested, in 2019, so the first ballot, so obviously when Johnson became the leader, you had Johnson, Hunt, Gove, Raab, Javid, Hancock, Stewart, Leadsom, Harper, McVeigh. They were all the people that went into the first ballot. Of course, it took itself down to just Johnson versus Hunt. Johnson got 66% of the members' ballot. Hunt got 33%. I've been asking you guys, who do you want to be your next Prime Minister? Steve Baker is a name that's coming up time and time again. Penny Mordaunt, another one. Carl says it should be definitely Dominic Raab. I've bet on him 27-1. Again, that Steve Baker is really kind of going. Fletch says if the Conservatives select Suella Braverman, Liz Truss or Penny Mordaunt, they will win the next election for sure. Banil says, Michelle, I wish you could stand. I'd vote for you anytime. I say,
still time.
I say, are you mad? No thanks. Although, to be fair, I say no thanks. Who wouldn't want to be the Prime Minister when you're actually here? Yes, you get a lot of flack, but when you hear the millions that I tell you that you can be earning on the speaker circuit, books and all the rest of it afterwards, why not? There's another sentiment again coming through that another election, let's have a snap election. Is that what you want? Do you want another general election? Would you go out and would you vote? Jill says, what's the point in voting if the PM that I voted for can simply be thrown out by a gang of bullies? Raymond says, I trust a strong woman. Liz Truss, that's who he wants. Again, someone else says, Michelle, you should. And I say, yeah, thank you for the compliments, is what I would say to that. Many people saying I would never vote again, irrespective of who the leader is. I've got to say, though, that the name that is coming through thick and fast that I'm receiving from you guys, it is Steve Baker. That name is coming up and up and up and up and up. Diane says, I simply, sincerely hope that Ben Wallace does not become the next leader of the Conservative Party. What I found interesting, Gordon says, I would personally like it to be Jacob Rees-Mogg, again, Liz Truss, Penny Mordaunt, for me, says Neil. Again, Penny Mordaunt says Trevor. Julie and Paul say nobody. The Conservative Party is finished without Boris. That's their prediction. Penny says, can we have Lord Frost? Is that possible, please? Linda says, I've got absolutely no interest at all who is going to become the next leader. Quite frankly, she says, they are all rubbish. So there. Joe's been in touch, saying a separate topic but linked. Please, Michelle, can you discuss, do you think special advisors have too much power? Giles? Oh, hang on, I was about to go to Giles. I had an intake of breath there from Alex.
So my answer is these advisors are actually only gain their imprimatur, only gain their any relevance by dint of the fact that they retain the confidence of their masters. I dare say, whilst it's an interesting read if you've got some time, the audience for Dominic Cummings' blog is far, far smaller than it would have been had he still been in post. That's because far fewer of us care what he thinks, and if he hasn't got the ear of the Prime Minister. In the end, it's only if the boss backs you that you have any relevance at all. People who think they've got too much power are looking at it the wrong way round. They only hold that sway because the boss still has confidence in them.
But I would say that Cummings has been quite kind of influential even after losing the backing of Boris. But Giles, where do you stand? Is special advisers too powerful?
No, I think Alex hits the nail on the head there. They only survive and live or die by the confidence of their masters. I think a lot, sometimes too much, is made of them. Ultimately, the politicians are the ones who make the decisions and they're held to account. I do think, perhaps with advisors, and I speak as someone who worked as a special advisor in Whitehall, there is no training for the job. And I think finding a way of actually preparing people better when they go in there would be really beneficial, because it is a unique situation in terms of helping run a government department. But no, I don't think they've got too much power.
Says a special advisor.
Former special advisor.
Daniel?
Well, just very quickly, you billed me as a special advisor to Boris Johnson today. I've never been a special advisor to Boris. I did work for Boris when he was at City Hall, but I've never worked for him.
Oh, I'm just reading my stuff. I'll tell them all off when I get off air.
No, you know the score, Michelle. We've been on before. Now, but I did want to say this. Whether they've got too much power or not, Alex makes a very good point. I mean, Giles makes a very good point as well. The real problem is they are too junior, they are too ill-organised, and they are not constitutionally embedded, so we don't really know what they're for. And the contrast you have to look at, in my view, is if you go to the Élysée Palace and you see the presidents of France and the sort of quality of people he has doing that sort of job, and that they can go on to run companies, and it is we are totally in the wrong place with our notion of special advisors.
Well, there you go. Lots of you, I said, has been sharing your thoughts. A sentiment that's come through thick and fast in the email tonight is that none of you, well, some of you, not all of you, but some of you are saying that you will never vote again. If that is indeed true, I find that a real shame. Never say never, that's what I say. Mark, you've emailed in and said it's your birthday. I'll end by wishing you a happy birthday. Have a great night. Have a great night, all of you. Thanks to my panel. I'll see you guys tomorrow.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest broadcast. Staying dry for most of us over the next few days, plenty of sunshine, particularly across the south, and temperatures starting to rise as well. Taking a look at the pressure sequence, high pressure dominates our weather scene. It does sit to the southwest of us at the moment, meaning northwesterly winds just making a little bit cooler across the north and the west. But into the weekend, that high pressure moves in and temperatures start to rise. Through Thursday evening, plenty of clear skies across England and Wales. This continues overnight. However, parts of Northern Ireland, Scotland, it will cloud over. The risk of some patchy light rain and drizzle largely across the west and over the hills. And temperature-wise, double figures for all, so quite a mild night to come. Friday morning, best of the sunshine first thing across eastern England. Cloud across western parts of England into Wales will burn back towards the coasts. However, Northern Ireland